usually the biggest bottleneck why CPMs are increasing and frequency is increasing, and we're seeing that downtrend is so we're off to Coldplay on Saturday.
Maybe the couple camera.
Let's hope for no HR disasters.
Get caught on the Jumbotron. With,
yeah, exactly.
Cuddling.
Hopefully should be all right. I'm going to make sure we tick the boxes. Don't bring head of HR in. Make sure we're there with our actual partners.
Yeah, the basics.
So yeah, I think we're all good.
We're back.
Big episode today.
It's not been us two in the studio for a few weeks.
I know. I felt cheated on slightly with the episode with Sam, but I know it was an absolute banger. So we'll definitely aim to get Sam on a few more episodes because he can definitely go deeper into all things AI and ops.
Yeah, but we're back on our favourite topic of meta growth and all things creative. Yeah, I wanted to chat a bit about incremental reach because I think it's a hot topic, especially for brands that are spending a high amount, say get into 5 figures a day and spend on meta. I think it's something that's a challenge and it's something that needs to be really approached with intention. So I wanted to talk a bit about incremental reach, how we're measuring it, how we're things you can get from Meta to help with that process, why it's such a key KPI, how to spot signs it's declining, and then how to fix an issue with incremental reach. So want to dive into account. I think you've got a lot of things from a creative perspective, how to approach that problem. Then also talk a bit about how we're seeing account structures develop as we're reaching those higher levels of spend. I think UK is interesting because obviously the market's a lot smaller than the US, so it's harder to spend like multiple 7 figures a month on Facebook as a channel.
Yeah.
I think that's why you see brands diversifying a bit more actively earlier in the journey than maybe in the US, where you can pump 3, 4, 5 mil a month through Facebook. So yeah, it's something we have to think about a lot with brands. So yeah, excited to dig into that.
Yeah, nice. I think from my side, just to add on to that, obviously we're going to go deep into uncovering new personas and angles. I think this is in terms of like refreshing that research phase. A lot of brands don't do that enough. So going to go through some techniques that we use to uncover those net new angles. We've had a few brands where, you know, we've gone through this process where we've found angles that just they'd never tested before, but almost were very obvious, and, you know, helped really get them to that next stage of growth. But it's a cycle that needs to continue. It never stops. So going to go through that and a bit more about that process. And I think we have recently finalized a new dashboard that reverse engineers spend targets to creative volume, and then how you split that across your different types of creative, UGC, hyperod, static, and then break that into SKUs. I think creative planning, as we know, is very operationally complex, and making sure that is done correctly is really, really important. So you're not just going into the new month with the same amount of volume, because as we know, marketing peaks throughout the year. The volume of creative that you need to be producing in a year, depending on those marketing peaks, you know, big marketing moments, is going to adapt that approach. So it's important that we are forward planning accordingly to set us up for success.
Yeah, especially with how long it takes to sort of realize that volume increase in creative. You almost have to be a month ahead of where you want to be spend wise, right? So I think we can hopefully guide some people through our approach there. I wanted to start with like, what is incremental reach, and like how are we thinking about tracking it and measuring it? I think it is to simplify it, it's like how many net new impressions are we getting with our meta spend per month? Like not every pound, not every impression on the platform is going to be new. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We know that it can take like 4, 5, 6 touch points to convert someone onto a product, break down objections, etc., and really get them through to site and purchase. But that being said, we need a certain percentage of our impressions each and every month going towards completely new audience. Otherwise, we are going to start seeing issues with declining, with increasing CAC, and issues with getting new individuals into the funnel. And this is a really common issue for brands when we're doing audits. Like they might be making a lot of volume of assets, or they might have an account structure that's just not setting them up for success here. And yeah, it's something that we make a real KPI. It's something we actively track for all of our clients. So we're looking at frequency. You can't actually get a measure of this in the Meta dashboard. So it's like, how do we pull together some metrics that we do have available to us to give us a bit of a steer on incremental reach? So the first is like CPM, obviously, and frequency. Like how are those two things playing together? Are we seeing like CPM increase over time? Are we seeing frequency also increase? Like if you look at that and multiply those two numbers together, you can get a cost per 1,000 individuals reached. Some people may have like quite a low CPM, but then like 6 frequency. So it's like, yeah, we're paying a low amount to get in front of people, but we're getting in front of the same individuals multiple times, and therefore it's multiplying your cost to reach unique people. So we start there, and that gives us a bit of a steer, but we can also pull some really interesting reports from Meta's reps, and we do this every month or every quarter, depending on the report. Firstly is like reach saturation reports, which I'll put one on screen somewhere so people can see what they look like. This gives you like a rolling view of what percentage of impressions in your account are incremental. So like what percentage of your spend is going to people each month that have never seen the brand before. And you will see this trend down over time. We usually see it average out around like between 10 and 20%. Like you're never going to have it like, especially at scale. It's hard to maintain it above that. And that doesn't mean every other impression that isn't incremental reach is negative. As I said, like some of those people will have seen your ad once, maybe don't even remember that ad. So it's important that they're still being retargeted. We're still putting creative in front of them. We're still nurturing down the funnel. But we really actively measure that percentage over time. And it's where we see that drop below 10% consecutively, month on month for a period of time, when we'll start to really see challenges with CPA. And that can be a lagging impact, but it's really crucial we keep that top of mind for brands. And that's where we start with a troubleshoot. If that's a problem, like how do we think about fixing that? Space Good's been an example of a brand that came to us with a bit of a challenge there when we first worked with them. So yeah, you can start by pulling with those reports, having a look at your CPM and frequency, and those are the signals that provide you with a view that like is this something we need to be thinking about a bit more actively in an account, and that can be kind of the early warning signs that maybe something needs to change, whether that's account structure, whether that's creative, and that's our springboard for looking at right, what levers can we pull to like really actively fix this problem for brands that are spending a high volume of their budget on Facebook and are looking to continue to scale that over the coming months. I think it'll be interesting. I want to talk a bit about the account structure piece, but maybe it's best to start with like creative, with it being arguably still the key lever there. Account structure I'll come on to further into the video, but I want to talk through what are the key fixes we can put in place from, say we're looking at the account over a 3-month period, we're seeing that decline, we're seeing those challenges with CPA, we're not able to push spend without that CAC decaying. How are we thinking about that from maybe a volume perspective first, and then we could dive into some of like how are we changing our strategy off the back of that?
Yeah, I'll actually, yeah. So from a volume perspective, obviously, when it comes to like Meta Andromeda now, like there's a few things that come to mind. One, we're not driving enough volume, but also creative diversity, and we're not like really diversifying the vehicles that we are using to unlock net new customers, which is why our frequency is increasing and we're getting in front of the same people time and time again. But like, we'll touch on spend in a moment and volume and how we reverse engineer that. But I think usually the biggest bottleneck why we aren't, why CPMs are increasing and frequency is increasing, and we're seeing that downtrend is essentially comes down to the strategy itself. We we aren't splitting enough of our creative into the right parts of the funnel. Now, the layers that make up a creative strategy are obviously your funnel positions first, which is usually where the core problems lie. Then it's personas, angles within each of those personas, creative types, and then the vehicles within each of those creative types. So if we're going down from the top up, like when we're starting with funnel positions, it is likely the biggest factor is that you're going like solution aware to most aware. And we had a big brand that we've just started working with. And when we did an audit there, we realized that most of their creative was like offer bundle focused. And they didn't even necessarily realize that. So just by us actually going in, resetting that creative strategy and saying, okay, how are we from a percentage standpoint going to split across the different elements of the performance funnel? So unaware and problem aware, as I've said previously, like I think realistically you need to be looking at least 50% of your funnel splits within unaware and problem aware creatives. The majority within that will be problem aware, with maybe like 20 to 25% in unaware. And then, depending on the time of year, solution to product and most aware will adjust accordingly. Obviously, we're going to see a bigger increase in product and most aware as we get into that Black Friday period. But as a BAU goes, you always want to be splitting higher up. If we then go down to like persona and angle, which in a moment we can, in the latter half of the episode, we're going to go into like how you can better uncover these. Usually it's because you're seeing that the personas that are being targeted are too surface level. We're not going into like core human beliefs of who these individuals are. And as a result, that is reflected in the messaging that we're using. And we're not uncovering the right angles or enough diversity of angles that are going to unlock net new customers. We're just recycling the same angles time and time again and the same messaging to get in front of new people. And, this aligns with Meta Andromeda as well as the vehicles that we're using to deliver that message. We need to be heavily diversifying and being, especially when you get into bigger levels of spend, being way more specific about who those personas are, down to like their core human beliefs, because that will uncover the messaging that we're using to get in front of them. And similarly with the angles that we're using. And then the final piece of that puzzle obviously is creative types. So I've actually seen brands work with us where they're just doing UGC and statics or just doing statics. And as soon as we've introduced high production and more top of funnel high production, they've seen that go more on an uptrend and almost like that hockey stick growth. They've reduced frequency, reduced CPMs, just by introducing another type of format, which is going to lend itself again to Meta Andromeda. AI is, it's able to people like to consume information in different ways, and it's going to cast a wider net for us being able to resonate with more people, essentially. And then finally, within each of those creative types is diversifying more vehicles. So, for example, if I look at different types of high production vehicles that will sit higher in the funnel, we don't just want to be making one type of high prod ad. We want to be doing podcast ads, founder stories, AI-driven, mash-up timelines, industry-exposed style creatives. On a UGC perspective, like there's lots of different vehicles, whiteboard education concepts, those more TikTok shop style creatives, those more one-shot UGC raw car conversations that are more story-driven, paper notes on the back. From static, we want to go more native with those concepts like Reddit posts, Instagram stories, these things that naturally lend themselves in terms of their messaging to higher in the funnel. So really, to unlock more incremental reach and more net new customers, you really need to intentionally be thinking about each layers of that creative strategy.
Yeah, I think that intention is key. And like, there's so many times when I'm speaking to brands in our pipeline where they have this like limiting belief that they've reached a ceiling on Meta. And it's like you pull out the reach saturation report, you look at the CPM and frequency, and it's like signaling, yes, we do have an issue right now with reaching new people. But you can also pull this, another report, which we'll put on screen again, is this aggregate creative fatigue report that you can see in the back of Facebook. And it'll show you a line of like percentage of creative that Meta believes is fatigued or is reaching the point of fatigue. It'll be low, medium, and high, and you pull that as well, and it's like that is the root cause of that issue, that belief, and it's the intention that then stems off of that, like how we like float, like removing that limiting belief and adjusting strategy to solve the problem. I think all the things you went through are so true. I actually think if there's anybody watching this right now, in terms of like what's a quick win, how can we get some quick momentum under solving that? I think starting that bottom up vehicle, that like format or vehicle change is often the quickest win.
Yeah.
Because there's so much untapped opportunity of just spinning up a UGC ad into a high prod or vice versa. I think founder stories are a great example of that. You'll see people do like quite high production founder stories, but I can think of an account we work with where we've probably reskinned a founder story for them 15 times now. And each time we nail it, it allows us to just get more incremental reach and new audience just by doing it slightly different.
And I would say if you're a founder and you don't want to get in front of camera, like you're at a disadvantage, like try and do that if you can. Because as Ollie said, that's probably the quickest win if we want to be unlocking more customers. I think if you don't, there's other ways around it. Like the example Ollie said, we'd started doing third person founder stories where it's almost a UGC creator green screened over a concept talking about the journey of a founder. So again, it's like taking that messaging but using a different vehicle to deliver that message. So there are other ways that we can reskin and rework that. We don't need to be reinventing the wheel every time.
100%. It's taking whatever's got you to this point, and then you're starting to see that decline in reach, you're starting to see that CAC increase. Like take the message, think about how to repackage it across as many different vehicles as possible, whilst you start doing some of the longer tail strategic work in the background to unlock new ways of taking product to market to completely different people and completely different pain points.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just so key that like every single creative, you're intentional about where it's sitting in the funnel, because that's going to completely change the messaging and the way that we're speaking to the customer in that creative. You know, it's like when we are going more top of funnel, I know we've said this a lot in recent episodes, but we're spending much more time agitating the problem, setting up the problem, educating around what that problem is, depending on the level of market sophistication. So again, like, you know, start exercising some of these things so we aren't just hard selling to people, because that's where you're just going to be getting in front of the warm audiences that already know your brand.
100%. So we've got like looking at the account, diversifying that vehicle, taking what's working and spinning it up in visually different ways. We've got pulling more asset volume up the funnel in terms of just splitting your percentage of output differently by awareness phase. I think net new angles is arguably the even bigger swing, right? Like really taking your product and finding a new persona problem combination or angle to bring the product to market in a completely different light. And I think we've seen a few examples of this recently where it's just completely transformed spend levels, and we've found this real quick breakthrough in volume. How are we approaching that in terms of like a research and ground up strategy perspective?
I think the key here is like you need to just be the research never stops. I think the best brands are the ones that on a 30-day cadence, they are continuing to dive deep into some of these research processes that we're going to go through in a moment, and they are remaining curious. We know less than we think about our customers, and many brands assume they know their customer base just because maybe they've done a post-purchase survey 6 months ago, or they look at a few of the reviews. But really, one thing that a lot of brands just do not know, and why we need to continue this process, is what they don't know is psychographic understanding of who their customers are. And that's normally why we're not unlocking net new customers, because we're too surface level or broad about who that persona is that we're targeting. So we need to be thinking about how people think, how people feel, how people like are behaving in their day to day. And these are like often areas that are like overlooked, but they're hugely critical to that process. So I think starting with curiosity and deep research. So one thing that I will do on a monthly basis is firstly look at like industry health. So using something like Google Trends, you can go in. I have a bank of keywords for every brand that we work with that are related to the problem, the pain point, the type of person we're looking to target, the behaviors that those people are associated with. And I'm going into Google keywords and typing those keywords in and looking at what the trends are saying, because that can really help direct us in terms of how things are changing. So, for example, like bloating as an example, we understood that like menopause for one of our brands was like a core holistic persona, whereas menopause is too broad, right? There's lots of different types of menopause. And by actually going deep into menopause on Google keywords and then looking at associated words, I was able to uncover that bloating and gut health was uptrending as an associated word. So looking at gut health as part of menopause as almost a sub-angle then really helped drive net new customers that were more specific to that problem within menopause. Through that, we uncovered new like research reports and other things that were associated. So Google Trends is something definitely to continue to use as part of that process to look at industry health. Language consumers use is also a really, really important one. So once we have our personas, we want to continually be looking at things like Reddit to better understand, the language that we're using, the emotional sentiment. It's an incredible place to find angles like Reddit, and just the way that people speak about their problems is so authentic. And I would say most of finding new angles comes through that. So, for example, the bloating side, if we're typing that in, what are some of the highest upvoted comments that we're seeing through that? We can also use like NPC servers as well now through Reddit, which I know Sam touched on the last episode, and I'm going to do an episode going much deeper into, where it can essentially through Claude, by asking Claude certain questions, it will be able to use Reddit to scrape relevant articles or Reddit posts associated with those keywords and pull some of those learnings in. So that's definitely something to go back and look at as well. And I think finally, like identity and self-perception is really important as part of that. I think the key here is like just understanding like more about consumers. People buy based on identity, not features. And I think a lot of the problem is when we're uncovering personas and angles, we're thinking too much about features, USPs, how our product is going to help them, and not like how we can best represent the identity of the customer. So like, when we're like doing this research on Reddit, Google Trends, organic TikTok, whatever it might be, like what are the lifestyle behaviors of these individuals? What are their values? What are their beliefs? The social roles that they play in society, their emotional drivers and triggers. We know their emotional triggers, and we can uncover this through that research. That can really help drive the messaging tests that we do as part of our creative. There's also like, I think the people that best understand personas and angles and how to utilize them will bucket their personas into one of these consumer identities, which is like and I'll put it up on screen. I won't go through all of them because there's quite a few, but you have like the aspirer. So like seeking status, beauty, social validation, the nurturer, care, love, safety, by better understanding by identifying a persona and where it sits within these consumer identities, we know how better to speak to these. And that's how we become more specific about the messaging we use and the language that we're using within those ads to get in front of those right customers.
Yeah, it's going deeper into those like need states and desires and bucketing those within those buckets that you mentioned. I think another interesting way that, shout out Chris on our team, has been going about this is like getting customers on the phone and interviewing them, which I think we obviously use a lot of customer data, and we do a lot of research on forums, etc. But for a brand that recently onboarded, he got a number of customers on the phone and really like just built a script and asked them about many of the things we've just gone through. And his words were that he could really like feel the pain in a way that's hard to before that. Like you really resonate with their problem on a deeper level. You really resonate on how that's transformed their life in a way that's hard to do it when it's just text on a screen. And I think that really helps him like take those insights and build scripts and concepts that just felt like they connected with the consumer on a deeper level.
Yeah.
I would encourage most brands to do some of that on a regular basis. Like really just go and speak to a customer on Zoom, even maybe record them and turn them into ad concepts if they're open to doing it. I think that's a really strong way of uncovering some of these deeper insights.
Completely agree. It's a great, I know for a research purpose, but it's a great type of creative as well that's working well, just calling customers and almost getting those like live, authentic testimonials. But yeah, I'd say like some of the biggest trends I just see with the brands that are just killing it are just there. Because what happens is when you're doing competitive research or audience research, you're looking usually at like direct angles or direct competitors. And what that means is you're in this echo chamber of copying each other, and you're not actually uncovering where the net new customers actually live or where you know they're identified as. So it's like with our indirect angles that are associated with like lifestyle behaviors or values. So some questions that you can like ask as part of this are like, what other products do they use? What trends do they follow? What identity buckets do they fall into, as I mentioned before? Quick tip as well, Pinterest is really good at revealing what people aspire to be. So it's a great place to look at untapped creative ideas, or even, you know, if you're typing in something that's an angle for your brand on Pinterest, what else is in that imagery that can be associated with what you're doing? Because it's often like there's a lot of untapped potential on Pinterest. It's also a great place where it shows validation for like types of statics that could really resonate with your target persona. So it's something I've started using a lot more that's really valuable as well.
People build like thematic boards on there, don't they? So I guess if you've got a board that has a common theme running through it, it gives you opportunity to find new ways to associate with that individual.
Yeah. Just quickly as well, like just to end that segment, I touched on Google Trends already and like how we're using that, but in terms of like your competitor analysis as well, on the research, using Google Trends, not only what I said in terms of your list of keywords, but think about indirect things associated with your solution. So for example, if you're a filtered showerhead brand and you type in on Google keywords, Google Trends, not Google keywords. If you type in on Google Trends, filtered showerhead, think about like what are the other associated categories with what that is. So if you think about it, water onto the hair. So look at like natural shampoo. Yeah. Think about other categories and how they are trending, because that is another great way that you can uncover new potential angles or things that are going to resonate with your target customer.
Yeah, I like start like finding things that solve the same problem as your product, but are distinctly different solutions to that problem. So even supplements for a filtered shower head may be an interesting one to look at, like hair loss supplements, itchy scalp, all of those areas, to just uncover different ways to appeal to the same audience, the same pain point.
Yeah. Another one that's really good as part of that research process. So we've mentioned like, what are they searching for? Google Trends, and also having your keyword planner where you can use those keywords to continue to look at deep research, look at Reddit and things like that. How are they asking questions? I think is another really interesting one. So Answer the Public is great for that. So if you type in your product or category, you can actually see the top types of questions that people are asking on Google based on rankings, which can also help uncover like what is resonating with them at that point, or what their true deep problems are that are associated with your product.
Nice. I think all of that research layers up into those big swing unlocks, right? It's the ability to find a completely new audience, and that then you can take that once you've found that angle. It's then you apply the same process of diversifying of format, vehicle, concepts, and I think that's the process. Those two processes need to be running continuously in a brand today to really reach the volume that is possible on Meta. I still think it's so possible to scale very quickly and aggressively if you can effectively deploy both of those processes in tandem with each other.
Exactly. Like a great example of that is just from that always on process. Like we had a brand where they had winning angles. We didn't need to be finding new angles, but you have to be so proactive in that process because they will eventually not die, but in terms of that incremental reach, it's going to start to plateau. So we were doing research around the product and the problem associated with that product, and actually uncovered that joint pain for a completely different market or type of persona was a problem that people were using that type of product as a solution for. And that from that, we uncovered loads of new angles, a new persona, a new angle, and then you can rinse and repeat that across all of your vehicles.
Yeah. I think you don't want to get to a point where you're in you've got a real need to find that, like you're desperate, you're really struggling to grow because you've exhausted an angle, you haven't found a new way to route to market. So that proactivity is key. And I think the Claude MCP is used. So I think AI in general to automate this process, like it's quite. We touched on this in the last episode with Sam, but it's easy to set up. It's relatively easy to set up automated reports where AI is doing the heavy lifting and just dropping them into Slack every month, every 2 weeks, maybe summarizing the last X amount of reviews. I love simple prompts like asking ChatGPT once you've done review analysis to uncover some of the less common angle persona pain points that are mentioned in these reviews under 10% of the time, or like that was a poorly worded example, but you know what I mean, prompting it in a way to try and directly uncover some of these can even be a quick win.
Exactly. I completely agree. I think a lot of the time the reason when you're not uncovering those little nuggets is because you're not positioning the input, the prompt in the right way. I've actually got like 5 or 6 prompts that we can share, so comment prompts down below that I use quite frequently as part of my research process. And it's like one of them is kind of what we just discussed, reverse pain point engineering. So based on this product, what are the unspoken or socially hidden pain points people may not admit out loud but still deeply feel? List 10 angles associated.
That was way better than my wording. Exactly that. Like that could uncover so much gold. And then final point on this is, again, owing to the fact that we're about to go into Black Friday, the seasonality is another layer on top of this for many brands. I was speaking to I think hydration's an interesting one to think about this through. You've got summer festival season, you've got festivals, you've got a lot of like sporting events, but then you go into the winter months where it's like energy, tiredness, fatigue, social calendar. Like there's loads. It's maybe that wasn't the perfect example, but you can see how the seasonality in business, you got gifting layering in through key moments, which may not be that present at all times. I think it's important to continue to run that research process to uncover those opportunities around key moments as well. Valentine's Day being another example early into next year.
100%. Should we touch on now that, let's say you've gone through that research refresh, you've reset your strategy, now you're like, okay, but how many creatives do I produce? Should we talk a bit through that process?
Talk about volume. And I think forecasting creative volume is an exercise that we've put quite a bit of time into recently. I don't think it's ever perfect because ad creation for D2C brands is an outlier game, right? You're never going to know perfectly when you're next going to produce this ad that produces outside returns. What are these angles that gets you a complete new audience unlock, this massive inflection point in spend? But we're trying to use the data points that we have available to us and the forecast that we use as our plan for execution for brands to back into an expectation of how do we think creative resource and volume needs to progress over time to meet those goals so that we're not caught short. and the goal is to exceed our targets off the back of that. So yeah, I know you've been putting a lot of time into this. I can give a quick high level plan of like, I think it's key that you have the forecast to start with. Like, what does our new customer targets look like for the next 3 to 6 months? And we're going to do a longer form video on building that forecast as we approach the end of the year. So brands are set up for next year. But just assuming that you're a brand or you've got clarity on what you want to achieve from a new customer revenue perspective over the next, say, 3 months, you've clearly then got a plan for ad spend off the back of that. And that will be broken down into channels, the lion's share of that, which will be Meta. And it's like, how do we take that ad spend target and the data that we have available to us across creative, so that hit rate and average spend per asset, and use those as a guide and back from target spend to average spend per asset, and our context on how we see that trend as brands increase volume and increase spend over time to produce a target output per month. And then we can use that to back it down into more of a distributed plan by concept, SKU, etc.
Yeah, exactly. So like, this is a process, whether you call it a growth strat, media buyer, growth manager, whatever it is.
Creative operations lead, it's someone in the business.
Exactly. It needs to be a process between them who are leading it and the creative strat and account manager, if you have an account manager leading more project management stuff within the business. But as Ollie said, like, the terms of those inputs, we need to be looking at predicted spend with current winners, which essentially is current live winners times average spend per winning ad. Winning ads needed to hit target. So essentially target spend divided by average spend per winning ad. And then you need to look at incremental winning ads required, which is the winning ads needed minus the current winning ads.
Yeah.
And then from that, you have your new ads to produce, which is incremental winners divided by hit rate. We can put this on screen as well. We've just built a whole system that builds this out, and you essentially work that out in the first tab on your spreadsheet. So you come out with your new ads that you need to produce. On the second tab, then you need to have broken that down across. We now are planning across a whole quarter, so a 90-day period. So that is then broken down into weekly deliverables. We've got our quarterly deliverables that we break into months, and that then is broken into weekly. We break that then into our creative types, so UGC, high prod, static. What we would usually recommend, now this isn't a blanket rule, because some brands see UGC performing best, high prod performing best, but what we see work best usually is around 30% against UGC, 30% against high prod, and 40% against statics specifically.
Yeah, and those statics, this all include your marketing moments, maybe some marketing calendar activations that you don't need to go as heavy on top of funnel, but longer form assets, but maybe are there as an offer activation over a specific time period. It would also include any bigger brand moments where you're doing the opposite of that, and maybe you're doing a celebrity activation and wrapping that into performance marketing. So it's holistic asset output across Meta. And that acts as the guide, and that static weighting is often due to that pursuit of some of those more activation moments.
Exactly. So to recap, we've reverse engineered from our spend the amount of creatives we need. We've broken that across weeks, across the next quarter, based on how many we need in that period, broken then down again times 0.3 across 30% on high prod, 30% on UGC, and then 40% on static. And then the third tab is how we then split that across our SKUs. Now, again, there's no exact science to like any of this. It's more just giving us as close a guide as possible, but we need to then prioritize our SKUs. So our third tab will be breaking down priority and then percentage allocation based on priority. And that then will essentially break those UGC, high prod, and statics into each of those SKUs then is the final piece of the puzzle from where you were originally at spend.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. I think the key call outs is it is imperfect, because the creative is a game of outliers, and it's very hard to predict, like when we're going to produce an asset that unlocks a new audience, or how that creative diversity execution is gonna how what the results are going to look like off the back of that. Like, we could move hit rate, and that will massively improve the outcome off this plan. We could, and our average spend per winning asset may jump significantly. But by setting this floor from like a pessimistic view of over creating almost based on our current baseline, with the view that we're going to probably be able to improve those metrics that layer into this plan, it means we're never caught short on volume, and we're always able to achieve the objective. But we have to start with the business objective, the targets on a business level for new customer, and on a SKU level when we're allocating across SKU. There has to be a level of like strategy applied to that. Like, do we want to activate a new SKU? Do we need to from a incremental reach perspective? That's another thing I wanted to touch on. Like, SKU diversification is an easy way to get in front of new audience, because you're packaging something completely different up in a completely different way to previous activity in the ad account. So there's a few things that need to be really considered when putting this plan together, but it's giving us a baseline to work from, where we're very proactive around increasing volume each and every month in the pursuit of growth.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, we're toying with the idea of giving this away for free. The problem is we're still stress testing it. So
yeah, I think we'll do an episode with the view of everybody's in obviously Black Friday mode right now. I think we'll do an episode on forecasting and backing down into an asset plan with 2026 in mind as we go further through into Q4, and we'll likely give it away at that point. I think
it's a good idea. Maybe we'll do a share screen where we break that down 100%. To the point of getting those final asset volumes across SKUs.
So I just wanted to end with we've got 5 minutes just to touch on account structure and testing very quickly. Obviously, we've talked about spotting incremental, like measuring incremental reach, spotting it's going to maybe an issue, proactivity around research, concept diversification, vehicle diversification, and volume. I think once you've got the volume, it's like setting the account up for success. Like the amount of accounts we look at right now that are that are structured in a way that's hindering the ability to drive consistent, scalable results with Meta's best practice in mind is still crazy. Like, it baffles me, some of the account setups we see. I think some of the basics that we're big proponents of is consolidation, really focusing on getting out of the learning phase. Like, we see some accounts where 40-50% of spend is stuck in learning. This is not leveraging Meta's Andromeda and AI, and it's limiting the impacts, and it's going to skew your CPA if you're above like 15-20%. We really want to be keeping an eye on learning limited. I always think about that as like any spend that's going through an environment that is learning limited needs to be done with an outcome in mind. Like, we need a justification for that spend. So asset testing is one of those, landing page testing, offer testing, anything where we've found winners, or we're trying to grow volume and we're trying to grow and we're trying to acquire customers as optimally as possible, needs to be in an environment that's prioritizing best practice and setting us up for success and volume. So, keeping an eye on learning limited. I think testing, my view on testing is like, there's so many different methods and ways to do it. And I always think through like the theory of constraints on testing, like, are we constrained by spend? Like, we don't want to spend more than 10-20% of total budget on testing. Otherwise it'll skew the total CPA in the account will be skewed because we're spending too much. So do we have more assets than we're able to test? Or do we have more budget than we do assets available to test, if that makes sense? And we're trying to drive more learnings and accelerate the rate of progress across creative. If we've got too many assets and not enough spend, like, I'm a big fan of a CBO with min spend caps. If we've got too much spend and not enough assets, or we're trying to really drive learnings across our creative function. I'm still a big fan of ABO, isolated creative by angle or concepts or whatever variable you want to choose, and really taking clear learnings by concept to fuel next stages of strategy and trying to grow volume over time. I've also spoken to quite a few people who are really liking ASC based testing right now, like throwing a wide diversity of assets into an ASC and seeing how that plays out. Like, we're not like wedded to a testing method. I think it's figuring out which of those is right for the account based on where the constraint is, what's showing promise, and leaning into that over time, but doing it with intention.
Yeah, makes sense. And I guess for people, because a question that always comes up as well is like, firstly, how do you then identify that that's a winner? You want to put that in a scaling campaign? Are you horizontally scaling? What does that look like?
Yes to horizontally scaling. Like, I'm a big believer in, like, if something's working on Facebook, we should spend more money on it, and we shouldn't. And whilst we also promote it, like, we scale that ad set or wherever that is in the testing environment, we scale it up, but we also promote it into our core like ASC scaling environment to maximize the impact of that winner. We're looking at setting ad set or ad level budgets at least 3 times target CPA. So if that's min spend per CBO, or if that's ad set daily budget on an ABO. And identifying winners is very account specific, right? It's like account CPA and then spent statistically significant amounts of money. And I think that's very dependent on the account, but that you need to benchmark that by SKU, by account, by offer, to know what that looks like. But we want to be at least getting, like, I think we want to be spending at least 3 times CPA per day, and I think like trying to get to 50 plus conversions on that ad or ad set is really
at a certain ROAS.
At the target CPA is like really statistically significant, but that can vary. I think as you get to know an account, you can often spot like leading indicators, but you need to give it enough time for Meta to learn, because you can often pick up engagement that helps the ad perform better. So you've got to give it that time to reach significance before we just throw it into a core scaling campaign. And then scaling, like, we are a big fan. I've only got a couple of minutes left, but scaling, we're a big fan of consolidation. Consolidation helps you drive better incremental reach because we're not competing with ourselves in an ad account. That may start with like one ASC, it may start with a CBO, it can vary. But as we're running with that structure as long as we can, but as we get to higher volumes, that does often need to develop. Like, maybe we've got multiple ASCs per product, or maybe we've got an ASC per problem persona combination, which we're seeing work really well for brands spending 20, 30, 50K a day plus in the UK market, because we are having to force spend to specific personas, audiences, pain points, angles, and almost build a creative strategy around each campaign to maximize our reach over time, because we're just seeing too much spend go through a small volume of assets, which by default doesn't appeal to as broad an audience as having that broader spread.
So that definitely since Andromeda as well, just seems to have picked up.
Yeah, it's like really leaning into that theory of creative is the targeting. So how do you set your campaigns up with that baseline fundamental in mind? Well, if that's the case, like, we need to probably diversify our setup to appeal to each campaign, appeal to a specific person. But again, that's like a little bit more hacky. It's not technically best practice, but it's what we're finding works when we're getting to those really high spends. An incremental reach almost becomes the key KPI for that brand.
Yeah, I think the key here is like, stop listening to people on Twitter that are saying there's a best way to test, because there isn't. There's no one size fits all.
No best practices.
Cool.
Perfect. We've got to wrap up. So yeah, thank you everyone for listening.
Make sure you subscribe.
We didn't touch on whitelisting. I'm going to do a mastermind on that, which we'll be releasing over the next couple of weeks. That's another great way to grow incremental reach. So keep an eye out for that. But thank you for listening.
Cool. See you in a bit.